Alrighty, so thanks for giving me the opportunity to talk a bit about the work that we do in the Amazon with the Peruvian Amazon with Fauna Forever. So yeah, basically my name, what I do, so field research coordinator. So basically for me that means I oversee the bird research, the bat research, and the reptile and amphibian research for our organization. What I want to do briefly is just give you a bit of an outline of sort of where we're working, because obviously Peru is a huge country, as you can see. The area we're specifically working is the Madre de Dios region. You can see it's sort of the southeast corner of Peru. And these are all our research sites in Madre de Dios that we've worked at over the last 20 plus years. Right now, most of our research is centered in this region, and we will hope to maybe this year, maybe next year, move up into here again a bit as well. But most of our research the last few years has been in here. But again, over the 20 plus years, we've covered this whole region. We also do some work west of here in the Sacred Valley area, which is close to Machu Picchu. But yeah, most of our work has been in this region. So when we talk about this region in Peru, a lot of people, some interns, tourists, etc., they're kind of confused, is this really the Amazon rainforest, or is it just rainforest but not the Amazon rainforest? So it truly is lowland Amazon rainforest, and I'll give you a bit of an idea of why that is. So it's part of the Amazon River watershed basin. So basically these dots represent sort of where the water comes from. So this is sort of the top of the Andes for the Tambopata River, and then it flows down to here, where it is actually joined by a different river called the Malinoski River. Then it continues flowing past Puerto Maldonado, which is the large city that's close to our research site. It joins another river here, which, to be honest, I can't remember the name of it because it's actually in Brazil. It cuts all the way through here, and sadly through all this deforestation, and Brazil and Bolivia is down here, and then finally actually meets the Amazon right here. So the water that is, flowing past our research sites will end up truly in the Amazon and eventually go out into the Atlantic. So it is truly the Amazon rainforest we're in. Basically, this whole zone is Amazon. So a lot of people, because of where we are, might wonder a bit about that, but I just wanted to give you some context about the region we're working in. So yeah, in terms of how we access our sites, just to give you an idea, most of our sites are along large rivers. This just gives you a kind of a bit of an idea of sort of a normal way for us to be getting to our sites and getting around. We have these variety of different boats that we use, and this is just a normal day. We're actually on the way. Can't remember what we were doing that day. I think we were on down to a ranger station that's down there, but that's pretty normal for us to just be getting around in boats. We have a few sites we would reach by vehicle. But yeah, the majority of our sites are along one of the large rivers like that. In terms of a little bit more about our organization, so again, there's a long history to it, which I won't take the time to go into extreme detail about. But we've been working in the region for over 20 years, and actually the organization predates the Tambopata National Reserve, and actually our director, my boss, he was actually heavily involved in the creation of that reserve and sort of where the borders of that reserve would be. In terms of what we do, again, a lot basically. A lot of what we do is long-term monitoring programs with pretty much every major taxa you can see. Obviously birds, large mammals. When I say large mammals, I'm talking jaguars and pumas and tapirs and peccaries and deer and capybara, like the large mammals. And then obviously reptiles, amphibians. The bats is a relatively new long-term monitoring program. Since I've been working with them, I've helped to develop that. Botany, and obviously inverts and a few other groups as well, but pretty widespread. In terms of the projects we do, again, they can be pretty large scale PhD programs, master's scale projects, and also projects that are collaborative with organizations across the country and sometimes internationally as well. We are pretty heavily involved in community development projects as well. My boss, our director, his PhD was actually done on ecotourism and the impacts on wildlife. The short answer is it's good generally for wildlife, but it's a complicated subject, but generally it's very good. So we're very heavily involved in helping lodges, etc., to develop their ecotourism program with an eye toward making sure it has a conservation component as well. And also, a lot of conservation initiatives where we're helping advise local governments, we're helping advise communities, landowners, etc. So there's a lot going on there, a lot to unpack, but you can see it's pretty wide-reaching organization in terms of what we've done over the last 20 years and what we hope to do in the future. And of course, another big part of our organization is actually training young future, hopefully, biologists and ecologists. These are some of the people I've gotten to work with over the last couple of years. Really fond memories. This was the group that was here back when COVID unfortunately shut our camp down in April, but And actually, just like Sophia, she's actually German, and she came to do mammals and herps, and she she decided to come out one morning for birds. She never missed another morning. She was hooked. She was just like, oh my God, this is so cool. So she came out every single morning. She was actually, Andres and her were like super fast learners too. They're super smart. And then his photos in here, Roy, because he's obviously he's from Peru. He's actually from Puerto Maldonado, and he's actually he's a cook that works across the region. And it's just an example that we try to involve the local community as much as we can. Anytime there's a way to get them involved and show them what we're doing and teach them. A lot of times we have children at our camps and they're pretty scared of snakes, for example, and we try to get them to realize that, snakes aren't all going to kill you. You shouldn't kill them when you see them, which is unfortunately what happens. So we try to engage the community as much as we can. And it's certainly something in the future I'd like to do more as well, but there's only so much we can do at one time. So moving on to what I want to talk about really mostly today, of course, is the birds that we have in this region. So when we're talking about the Tambopata region, again, Madre de Dios, if you remember the map I showed you, it's a big area, and it extends into the Andes. So if we talk about what's in the Andes, we start going into some more warblers, and we get some different ant pittas, and there's a whole bunch of stuff up there. That's like another whole ecosystem. So the Tambopata region, well, I guess the southern part goes into the Andes, but for the sake of this, I'm talking about lowland rainforest. So I'm talking about 175 to about 275 meters above sea level. True Amazon, lowland, humid, 95% humidity, hot, sticky jungle environment. So we'll just give you a brief overview of the species that we have. So obviously start off with the red and green macaws, but I'll talk a bit more about the macaws and parrots in a minute. But when I do presentations for schools and children's and people who are not maybe as aware of how ecosystems work, we always kind of want to explain to them why we have so many species in the Amazon comparative to, well, here or any other temperate zone. And of course, one of the big reasons for that is because of the diversity that's in the habitat. When you fly over it, it looks like a forest, but you get inside of it and you realize there's so many microhabitats that allow for the speciation to be so extreme. So obviously we have rivers and lakes, which we of course have in the temperate zone as well, and forest edge, which is really, I guess here you would definitely see species that would be more forest edge and disturbed habitat as well, but it's very pronounced in the Amazon that there are species that pre-human impact would have been really specializing in the edge of the river edge, but also in natural tree falls. But now these species have actually increased in numbers because of human impact. There's a lot more forest edge for them. But they're very much forest edge specialists. And then of course, within the forest, you get a lot of diversity. Species that live here in the canopy are almost, there's always exceptions, but almost never here. And actually, the ones here are never there. You will never see a bird that lives its whole life here suddenly up here with almost no exceptions. And there's even species that really specialize within here. So you get that strata effect that allows for so much speciation. Of course, that can happen in a temperate zone as well, but it's just so marked and so extreme in the tropics. And that's one of the major reasons you see so much diversity. In terms of how many species are in the area that we're working in, like that lowland, you could argue what the number is, but it's around 600 species. So there's a lot of diversity, and these are some of the reasons why. So I'm just going to go over some quick examples. I won't go into a lot of life history detail on every species because it would take way too long. But obviously when you're in rivers and lakes, you get herons, sea egrets, not that much different. If gray heron, kokoi heron, it's not that different, it's a heron, right? Lapwings, terns, not that much different than what we have here. One interesting thing in terms of like waders is that even though there's rivers everywhere, there's actually very few waders. Like terns, there are no gulls in the Amazon, which is like, what? There's no gulls. There's two types of terns, that's it. And in terms of waders like lapwings and plovers, not that many. It's not nearly as much as you'd think. There's other species that often fill that niche. So it's actually a lot less of these. If you come to the Amazon, like I can't wait to get all my hundreds of waders, you're kind of in the wrong place. You go to the coast for that. But there are some, as you can see. And then obviously when you're talking about rivers and lakes, we have actually 5 species of kingfishers, the biggest one being about that big, so big chunky boy. We don't have a lot of sparrows, believe it or not. There's only 3 sparrows in the whole region. 2 are common. This one's always found in the river edge. There's another one very similar, really rare. There's one inside the canopy as well, which I may have a photo of, but that's it. You might think a whole bunch of finches, a whole bunch of sparrows. No, actually not really. Horned screamers, these are great, really weird birds because I guess what's weird about them is this photo doesn't do it justice. That's like a really big bird. It's about that big. actually maybe about that big. But sometimes you'll see them sitting at like the very top of a 40-meter tree. They're really strange. They fly a lot. They're one of the few big birds that spend a lot of time on the ground, but also go up high as well. And yeah, giant cowbird, really big corvid. I mean, giant is pretty applicable. It's a large bird if you're going like the length of it to the tail, to its bill. Yeah, it's a nice big bird. These guys are actually cute too, because you'll often see them actually riding on a capybara, actually picking off ticks and other insects. So they have a really nice relationship. Forest edge again, so these are species that you could see them river edge, but you also see them around like a lodge. Like if you guys come down and you go to a lodge, you're going to see these. Maybe not only boat-billed flycatcher, but you're going to see about 6 species that are very similar to this, that you have to be really careful to ID them based on bill shape, slight change in supercilium, calls. These guys have a really cute call actually. Yeah, they're awesome. Silver-beaked tanagers everywhere. If you put a net up around certain shrubby areas, oh my God, you know, like 20 of them in an hour, and they're a freaking nightmare. They're like that big, and they're really fighty and powerful. And yeah, I've got trauma from banding them around too many areas. But in the middle of the forest, thankfully, you don't get them. Yellow tufted woodpecker, really, again, we have a lot of woodpecker species, but that's the most common one. These guys are quite pretty, quite loud, quite social too. They're often in really family groups of like 2 to 5 individuals. And obviously, hermit, you guys probably already figured out by the bill and by looking at it, but hermits, emeralds, starthroats, whatever, they're all hummingbirds. It's just different ways of saying the same thing. And one thing that's cool about hermits is you find them anywhere where there is forest edge or openings in the forest, because they feed on a type of plant called a heliconia, which anytime you go to the Neotropics, you're going to know what it is right away. They're like a really weird hanging flower that isn't a flower but kind of looks like a flower. I don't have a photo to show you. I can show you later. You can Google it. But heliconia, and hermits are directly associated with them. There's numerous species. If you have heliconia, you will have species of hermits. It's a really cool relationship that they have. So now, forest edge, oh yeah, 2 more too, Oropendulas and caciques. So these are actually icterids, and they're really common. A couple of things about them. These guys actually nest in hanging baskets, so they make hanging baskets in a large social group. Caciques, you could have 50 or 100 pairs easily in one tree. Super loud. These guys are mimics too. They can be so good at mimicking. It actually drives you nuts doing point counts, but it's not their fault. But Oropendulas are hilarious birds because they do the same thing. They're slightly less social. But this here, you're like, what is this bird doing? They have this teardrop kind of call they make, or I guess you could say song, where as they're doing this, they go, and it's the coolest thing. Like when you're there a while, you're just like, Oropendula, I've seen thousands of them, but when you first get there, it is just like, oh my God, what is this bird doing? It's so cool. And you get great views of it, so they're awesome birds to see when you get down there. And there's multiple species. The russet back's the most common for us, but there's many across the Neotropics. Okay, moving into some more specialized groups. Obviously, we have nightjars, which kind of very similar life history that we would find in this area or North America. The potus are another story. I'm sure many of you have heard of them. They're a lot basically like the tawny frogmouths. But yeah, the eyes are crazy. They're extraordinarily cryptic. I mean, this is a lucky photo with the eye open. And the calls for them is just amazing. I'm not going to take the time to play it now, but I'd be happy to play some for you later if you want to hear it. Or anybody watching the video can Google it. But common potu has, I think, one of the most beautiful melodic nighttime sounds you'll ever hear. And then great potu is a demon. It is absolutely a demon in the forest. And if you've never heard it, you're walking at night, pitch black, maybe you're alone at night walking the forest. I've done that many times. And suddenly you just hear a demon from the depths of hell. And if you don't know what it is, you're like, what? But no, it's just a great potu. It woke me up one night. I thought it was actually like a jaguar that might have been sick or something, literally, because I hadn't heard it before. I got out and looked around and spotlighted, and I was like, oh, eye shine. And then when it flew, it made a flight call. And then I was like, oh, wow, that's great potu. Now I know what it is. But yeah, potus have amazing calls. I love them. In terms of owls, we don't have that many species, but the ones we do have are, well, relative to other birds, they're really, really cool. I mean, crested owls are just, they're just amazing. Look at your tusks, incredible. Black banded, obviously tawny bellied. This is, I've caught quite a few of those actually. And spectacled owls are, I've actually worked with them in captivity. They're really cool owls. They have a really cool call. Random side note, they're actually the only owl I've ever worked with that actually likes to be petted. Like they lean forward to have their cere rubbed. They love it. Very social, they do a lot of owl preening in the wild, so they really like it when you have them and they're trained as well. Really, really cool owls. I love them. Diurnal Raptors, again, whole bunch. kites, roadside hawk. Okay, common buzzard here, super common. Where I'm from, red-tailed hawk, super common. Down there, roadside hawk, just absolutely everywhere. You can't avoid them. But they're forest edge specialists, that's why. Prior to human alteration, they would have been a lot less common, but now they just are everywhere. Caracaras, this is one of the common caracaras we have. These guys are normally associated with water more. And caracaras are actually related to falcons. They're in the same family. The laughing falcon is a falcon in the family, but it's not falco at all. Its life history, its behavior. We only have 2 species of falco falcons where we are, which is the orange-breasted falcon, which is super rare, and the bat falcon, which is actually common, and it does feed on bats a lot, hence the name. The laughing falcon is one of what we call the forest falcons. So they are much more like an accipiter, much more like a hawk here in Europe. You can see really long tail, much more rounded and shorter wing than a typical falcon. And they hunt in the forest. I mean, this is you'll see these guys and you'll hear them, my God, all the time, perching sort of at the top of the canopy vocalizing, but when they're hunting, they're going into the canopy usually to hunt, okay? But there's many other forest falcon species. Diurnal raptors, obviously, king vultures. We have about 5 species of New World vultures, but the king is the king of them. Andean condors do not come into the jungle, so this is the biggest, it's the biggest Amazonian vulture in the world. Ornate hawk eagle, I mean, the hawk eagles are just, and black, I mean, they're just ridiculously beautiful. It's insane. They're not that big, but they're just so, so beautiful. And then the granddaddy of them all, the most powerful raptor in the world. They take howler monkeys off trees and rip them off, no problem. Over 500 PSI in the talons. I mean, insane. It's amazing. I've seen one, and it wasn't the greatest view, but I don't care. It's still really amazing. And the reason you don't see them often is they aren't that common, but also because they are very cryptic in their behavior. They don't vocalize a lot, and they're often perching very not out open in the canopy, but kind of hidden. And then they are basically a gigantic accipiter, and they've got, for their size, long tails, short wings for their size, and they're expert at weaving through all that vegetation in the canopy. So they're actually quite cryptic to actually see, and they've got a massive territory. We don't know exactly how big their territory is, but it's probably at least 100 square kilometers for a pair, if not bigger. So it's really, you can have them breeding and see them once a month, and that's because they're only in your area once a month. It doesn't mean that they're not around. But that's also why they're under so much pressure when habitat is lost, because for a pair to survive, it needs a huge area. Because monkeys are really smart, and when they see anything of that shape, they instantly dive down and get out of range. Sloths is another thing they rip off trees and like to feed on, but again, there's not that many sloths, so they need a huge territory to get their food. A little tiny tanager bird is, come on, it's a joke. It's like eating one chicken nugget. It's not enough for them. They need big prey, and they need a lot of size of territory to be able to do that. Okay, in the forest canopy, so we're going to work our way down now, focusing specifically on the forest structure. Little nuggets of gold. Like, these guys are so beautiful. They're so pretty. A Dacnus is a tanager. Don't worry about it. Same family, okay? Actually, these guys are in a different family now. They reclassified them. But these two, same family. Just insanely beautiful birds, but they're insanely hard to see. You earn it to get a good view of these birds. The way you see them really is canopy towers, like 35 to 40 meter towers above the canopy, and then finally you're at the height and you can see them, because from below you see the shape and you hear like the exact same little squeak from all of them, and you're like, oh, it's probably a really pretty lifer that just flew away and I can't ID. But from up above, you get to see them. Like this one, you will, if you came for 2 days, I can find it for you, no problem. Super common, but some of the others, this one too. But there's some that are much more rare. Titairas are another family, Titiridae. There's actually 3 species down there. All these guys are kind of omnivores. They eat some fruit, they eat some insects. Yeah, pretty omnivorous in what they feed on. But canopy specialists, really, you'll just almost never see one of these in the understory. And if you do, it's near forest edge or a tree fall. Obviously, in the forest canopy as well, you get all the remphastids, all the toucans and toucanettes and aracaris. These guys are actually, obviously very pretty, very powerful, pretty easy to identify by their call as well, thankfully, especially the toucans and most of the aracaris. Interesting side note about these guys, we often think of them as being frugivores or granivores, but they are extremely opportunistically carnivorous. They will go into a nest and just pluck every single chick out. I've seen aracaris, those yellow-tufted woodpeckers I showed earlier. Yeah, I sadly watched a family of woodpeckers being attacked by a family of aracaris just raiding the nest. So cute as they are, they can be really mean, and they have a really powerful bill. They will just ratchet on and saw your finger. So, but it's okay. I don't mind the pain. It's worth it. In terms of all the cetacids, all the parrots and parakeets, yeah, I mean, we have a wide range. I'm trying to, top of my head, it's close to 20 species of parakeets, parrots, macaws, parrotlets. Yeah, some are really common. Like, yeah, every day you'll see them. Yeah, these guys, depends on where you are. If you're in the right area, you'll see them every day. Well, cobalt you'll see every day, everywhere, if there's any kind of habitat. But the others, it depends on where you are. Habitat specialists, some of them. And then again, the parrots, these guys are really, really pretty. They're all really pretty, but they're really common. They're pretty common, and then these guys are actually pretty specific. Depends on where you are if you get lucky with them. Macaws, we have 6 species. These are my personal favorite, but I just think the colors are really nice. Blue-headed is probably the rarest in our area. Size-wise, the blue and yellow is about the same size as the scarlet and the red and green. The blue-headed and then the chestnut and the red bellies are actually pretty small, so they're about, say, this big, whereas these guys are more like that, quite large. And as beautiful as these birds are, all these cetacids, the parakeets, the parrots, especially the macaws and the parrots, they just sound horrible. Like, I mean, they're just like, you just get used to it. But I mean, maybe some people love it, but it is after a while. It's like, for such a pretty bird, it's not the most musical call, but it's very complicated, and they can actually pick out individuals. That's a whole other subject, but their ability to communicate and identify individuals is astounding. Moving into the subcanopy. So these are birds that are like living close to the canopy, but they don't usually perch on top. They don't fly above it. They live just under the top generally, okay? So you're looking at maybe 20 to 30 meters, so to speak, for most forests. The trogons are just, they're just amazing looking birds. They're so pretty. They're generally feeding on insects. They will eat some fruit, but they're mostly, insectivorous. They have a very weird behavior because they're very still. They just sit there for like hours sometimes with a very vacant stare in their face. There's interesting birds when you see them because you're just literally sitting there for hours. The motmots are much more active. They are also mostly insects, but some fruit as well. In fact, when you ring them or band them, if they've been eating fruit all over you, you know it very quickly. But they're pretty powerful bill as well. We actually catch them in our nets sometimes because they will come down just a little bit lower every once in a while. The barbets, very, very restricted to that altitude, or that height in the canopy. They don't come down low very often, but there's many species of them that are very pretty as well. Gilded is the most common, but there's 4 species in our area, so very, very pretty birds. A couple of really characteristics ones. So the puff birds are just, well, the name says it all, puff birds. They're puffy. They're angry puffs of cuteness. They're actually, if you remember the first slide with me holding a bird, that was a black-faced nunbird, and they're in the same family, Buconidae, which is the puff birds are in. And they're mostly insectivorous again, big, powerful bill. When we talk insectivorous, we're talking about grasshoppers or crickets or katydids, which are that long. So that bill is needs to be powerful to kill those things and be able to eat them. And screaming pia, so it's a gray bird, and it's got its bill there open, and it's like, why did I pick it? Just a random gray bird. It's the most sexist bird in the world. I say that because the males actually leck. I'm guessing everyone in this room probably knows what lecking is. I can explain later if not, but you probably already know. So the males are lecking, and their call is quite literally a cat call, like literally a very sexist, derogatory, well, not a derogatory, but sexist kind of whistle at a pretty girl. That is exactly what they do. Like, there's no, that is what they do. There's no way it's not that. When you play it, it's like, why? Because I remember I've talked to interns, when they first went out in the jungle, they thought someone was whistling at them. They're like, no, that's just screaming pia. It's such a funny call. And it's, whenever I go back, as soon as I get in a truck or car and I drive near the forest and I hear that, I'm like, yep, I'm back in the Amazon, because that is a very characteristic call of being there. Now in the understory, we've got different sort of groups of birds. We've got some, I guess you could say game birds, like almost like a grouse or pheasant. They're not necessarily in that family like they are, but the tinamous aren't and the curassows are not. But the body structure is very much like a grouse or a partridge or a pheasant. Rapid flight, explosive flight, very cryptic behavior, mostly terrestrial, roosting in trees and sometimes flying up, but mostly spending their life on the ground. The tinamous are very common, very widespread, and they account for a huge amount of biomass in the understory because of their size. They're preyed on by quite a few animals as well. many species, very specific niches, whether it's floodplain, terra firma, et cetera, et cetera. But there's actually a lot of speciation in the tinamous, and once you work in the Neotropics, you get to know tinamous and their sounds very well. They're actually easy to identify by sound, by call or song, thankfully. The curassows are hunted for food a lot. All of these are, but they in particular are, because they're very desired, because they are quite tasty. They are where we work. These are extinct anywhere where humans have any real activity occurring. So if you go into the National Reserve about 2 kilometers back of the river, where no one ever goes, you'll start to finally hear them. And they have a really deep, booming song, which on a recording is useless, but in person it's very powerful. But you go out anywhere near people, they're gone. Yeah, the same as like spider monkeys, just hunted to extinction anywhere there's people. These guys are too small to be hunted, thankfully for them, so they're decent. If you find the right habitat, you can usually hear them and see them at night. Okay, so now we get into the birds that normally we catch a lot in the nets. The bulk of I guess to me these next few slides are the real indicator groups, the ones we catch in our mist nets when we do research. And you can learn a lot about the composition of the habitat, the quality of the habitat potentially. These are just the ones. It's kind of like what we catch here all the time. These are the groups. Thamnophilidae. So these are the ant birds, ant bird, ant wren, ant shrike. There's ant vireos. There's anything of an ant first. Pretty much, unless we're talking about there's one other group that has ant that isn't in this family, but most of them are in Thamnophilidae. And you can see they're all pretty similar coloration and shape. They are very sexudomorphic in most species. The adult males looking, as you can see, kind of a mixture of black and gray and white. I should put a female in there. That was dumb of me. But females would be kind of brownish colored. But very sexudomorphic, and usually pretty easy to sex and age if you know what you're doing down there because of that. But these guys, again, a huge amount of captures of this family. The other family is Furnariidae. Again, this is actually a bigger family and much more diverse in life history. So like the Thamnophilidae, generally life history is just hopping around different branches. There is some variation, but it's similar. It's quite similar. But there's more variation in Furnariidae simply because you have this group, which is the wood creepers. In fact, some people break them off into subfamilies. It's too complicated for this presentation. But the wood creepers and then all the leaf tossers, foliage gleaners, xenops, etc., have a little different variation. So these guys kind of act like a woodpecker, but they're not a woodpecker, and they're not really a creeper either. They're in that family, but their behavior is very, vertically on a tree and foraging amongst bark and amongst dead leaves, etc. This is the most common bird that I've caught in my time down there. Wedge-billed woodcreeper, wedgie, glides by. Catch them all the time. And then the other group, the leaf tossers, foliage gleaners, again, more typical bird behavior, perching on leaves or on branches. Foraging on the forest floor sometimes. But again, we catch a very large variety of these, and as you can probably imagine, they're quite similar looking, so identification can be, it's definitely doable, but it's often you need to check the guide to confirm field marks because they are very similar, and there's many species. And then in the forest understory, we have a few other species that kind of mix in with the Thamnophilids and also with the Furnariids. So red crown ant tanager, it's not actually a typical tanager because it's ant tanager. They just add the ant and then that changes everything. Ant thrush, it's not a thrush. It's not a turtid. It's its own family, the Formicaridae ant thrushes. We do have thrushes down there, by the way. I didn't put one in here, but we have actually about 5 species. But the biomass of them is, depending where you are, it's not as significant as the Thamnos and the Furnariids and actually some of these. And these are actually both flycatchers. So the ringed ant pipit is a flycatcher, and then of course so is the ochre-bellied. But we don't get a lot of flycatchers in the understory. There's about 6 species we catch regularly. And these guys are actually quite interesting because they are very terrestrial, as you can tell by the really long, thin legs. I think I was telling someone before, but they can be really annoying to get out of the net because they are delicate and well, they're a flycatcher. I mean, come on, they're delicate. And they've got these really long legs, but they're also big enough to get really stuck. So that's a bit of an advanced extraction because of, they're delicate. But it's usually no problem, but you do need to know what you're doing with them. And then also we get some very pretty birds. Obviously, the manakins I kind of saved for last because they're just such stunning, beautiful birds. For those of you who don't know, we probably do know about the manakins, but the manakins are incredibly sexudomorphic in most species. The females are just greeny, bland. I mean, they're cute, but they're just green and kind of bland. And then the males are just like ridiculously stunning like that. And they lack, so obviously the males perform for the females. Some species there's ancillary males that sort of work with the dominant male, and in other species it's just all the males try to outcompete each other. And they do a dance and vocalization, wing beats. It all depends on the species, but I thought I had a video of that in there, but I don't. But you can certainly Google lots of videos of manakins dancing. It's pretty intense. It's pretty cool and cute. So we do get some really colorful birds. We catch these guys. If you're in the right area, you can get like 6 of them in one net check. I mean, they're everywhere. If you're in the wrong area, you don't get any, but if you're in the right area, you get a whack of band-tailed manakins. Very common in some areas. And then occasionally we do actually get some migrants from my home area. This is a Swainson's thrush. I actually caught this when I first went down there, so this is over 3 years ago now. And it's just cool, imagine if you guys went to Africa or something and, caught a bird that you see up here. It's kind of the same for someone like myself. You'll see the range of this bird is, like I'm from, kind of in this area, and most of their population's breeding here, and then I caught it, down in this area. That's just really cool. We get some migrants. We don't get a lot because most of our, North American migrants kind of finish in this zone, I'd say. But we do definitely get some migrants that come down here. And we actually get austral migrants as well. So we're in a zone, austral migrants rarely go this far. They often sit here or here. But we're in a zone where we do get migrants from both areas. It'd be kind of nice if we got more northern, but whatever. We get from different areas. Different times of year we get austral or boreal migrants. And once in a while, strangely, you'll even have, like, within the same week, you'll have one of each sort of region as one's leaving and one's coming. It's pretty cool, actually. Okay, so just quickly to go over a little bit about how this works. The thing to remember when it comes to aging is that our birds can breed year-round. There is no, it's first year, second year. We don't do it that way. We look at it based on the year of the bird's life, not a calendar year. To give you an idea of what that would mean, I have found the wedge-billed woodcreepers, which I talked about earlier. I've found them with brood patches where they're incubating in September and November, absolutely, pretty much every month. And then actually just before we left, actually, I found one with an egg in it, a female, April 14th. So like, it's virtually year round. You can't just look at it and say, this is the breeding season, that's it. There is peaks to breeding, but to actually say it's definitively that, this is their season and nothing else, you can't rely on that. You need to really go by each individual bird. So I'm just gonna go out of this really quick to give you, because I wasn't gonna try to combine these and take too long. So this is the terminology that we would basically use where we're from, okay? So these are the strategies and these are some of the terminologies. So we've got basically 4 strategies that birds fall into: simple, basic, complex, basic, simple, alternate, complex, alternate. Basically, I'm trying to think of examples of how it would apply here. So simple, basic is basically raptors. One molt, that's it. And the next year they do another molt, and it may take them quite a few years to get to adult plumage, but in terms of how many molts occur within their year of life, it's 1, basically, that's it. Complex basic, which is, I would say, the most common one that we have in our area, most of our birds, are similar to a lot of the birds that you'd have here. You've got obviously juvenile plumage, and then within their first year of life, they have what we call a formative plumage. You guys would refer to that as a post-breeding molt for a first-year bird. And then after that, the rest of their life, they have 1 molt. That's it, okay? Most of the birds that we fall into, that we capture, fall into this category. You get, of course, alternate molts, which would be because, again, you have a species that has juvenile, and then it has an alternate that first year, then it molts again after it's breeding, then it would have a alternate going into the next breeding season, et cetera, et cetera. And then you get some of them that just love to molt, and they have a juvenile, then they put in a little formative, and then, oh, hey, I'm going to molt again, and then, oh, I'm going to molt after, then, yeah. So you do get some mixture, but most of our birds fall into this. The thing that makes it sometimes challenging, of course, is that the extent of that formative molt does change a lot. So the Thamnophilidae, which are the ant birds, ant shrikes, etc., they have a partial pre-formative molt. So this molt is partial. So you find a molt limit in the Gary coverts. Honestly, it's pretty simple. Some of the females are a little hard because the plumage is basically identical. But I mean, a male is, come on, it's like brown or gray. It's super easy. But for the Furnariidae, which are the wood creepers and foliage gleaners, their formative molt is complete. In every species that I've ever dealt with, virtually every species, I think in the Andes there's a few that are partial, but basically it's complete. That is the working assumption for every species you encounter until it's proven otherwise, is that they're complete, which makes aging a freaking nightmare. Because if you get a bird that's not molting and you look at it, No idea. Yeah, I just have no idea. So that's where sculling for us is mandatory. Now you might think to yourself, can't you tell by the structure of the feathers? Sometimes you can, but it's really hard. It's a very similar structure. So it's some species you can, but some swat. Most species, if you can tell by the structure, because it's full juvenile, you don't have to worry because you can tell by the skull. So that's where sculling for us is extremely important. And then I'll just show you this just to save some time. Okay, so the coding that we use, and this may seem really specific, but it's kind of maybe cool to give you guys an idea of how we do it. So you guys here would obviously use like, 1K or 1.0 or 1 plus or 2 plus, etc. We have a, maybe a little more specific aging just because we don't have the year to work from. So we have a 3-letter code system that we use. So this is kind of like what year, like, so kind of you could say what year or what type of molt is it in? Is it molting or not? And then what plumage is it actually in or going into? That's kind of what that means basically. And most of these codes work really, really well. There is one FAJ, which I despise, but I hope nobody from Neotropics is watching this. Sorry, but it shouldn't be FAJ. But I could go over that later if you want. But anyways, that's just a personal pet peeve. But the good thing is that these are all the codes. These are the only ones you can have. So once you learn what they mean, these are the only codes you can have. You can't have any of the combinations. So once I get people used to the coding system, I can throw, DA, whatever, DAF or whatever, and say, what's that? And somebody who really starts to know the system well would say, that's impossible. You're tricking me. I was like, yes, I am. You're right. Good job. Because there's logically only certain codes can work together, which, is similar here, but you can tell there's a lot of different codes. So, but it all makes a lot of sense once you get used to the birds. As maybe it seems complicated, but it's really not once you get used to it. So back to this from current slide. There we go. There we go. So just to give you a little bit of an idea of, this is one of the harder ones. It's not the hardest. Ringed ant pipits are maybe the hardest, but this is one of the harder ones. So this is a musician wren. You can see it is a wren. It is, but it's a different. It is the same family, but it's quite a different. I guess if you want to say subfamily. It's a bigger and very different nostril structure than the wrens we have here. And yeah, quite a bit bigger. But this one has, this has what we call a partial preformative molt, meaning for you guys here, it would be a partial post-breeding molt in its first year, if that makes sense. Post-juvenile. Post-juvenile, sorry, you're right. And so there's a molt limit on there. We'll give you guys a second to kind of find it. And then...
It could have been that capital, this big.
Yeah. Can you guys see where it is? Yeah, so I think you got it, yeah. And then, yeah, there you go. So those are the most. So these are obviously the new, what we call formative feathers, and then those are the retained juvenile feathers. So that's that's like on a scale of 1 to 10, that's like maybe a 6 or 7. But there are some ones that are much, much more cryptic than that. That was one that I could get a nice photo to really show people up. That is not super easy, but also not super, super hard. And then for the sculling, this is not the greatest quality video, but I just want you to watch. You can see, you can kind of see right there, okay? And I'll play it again. That's the actual window in the unossified skull. Now, first of all, some of you may think, wow, that skull's really wet. We do use water, but keep in mind, it's the tropics. It's 95% humidity, it's super hot. The bird is we've recaught birds an hour later that were sculled, and you can no idea it even happened. So it doesn't hurt the birds whatsoever, and because it's such a vital part of the aging process, it absolutely justifies using water because we need to be able to see that. So you can see that, they're pretty obviously clear. Without that, because of the color of the skin and the color of the feathers and the light in the jungle, you would make a lot of mistakes. And having looked at data and spoken to other people, I do feel there's been a huge amount of mistakes in the past on some aging because people didn't use lights and didn't use any water, and they just maybe blew quickly and they're like, yeah, it's fine. And the thing is, for those birds that have a complete preformative molt, if it's a 5 skull, you need to see that. If you don't, you've given up, you've lost the chance to age it. So we really need to see it. That is about a 4, that one there. But a 5 is a 5 would be that, like just that little spot open, a tiny dot, and that's enough to say it's first year. Without that dot, you've lost the ability to age it, and suddenly it's FAJ, and it's kind of useless in terms of aging. So that's a really good example there. In terms of some of the birds we catch, obviously we've had some pretty good success, really nice, really pretty, cool birds. The golden collared toucanet, that was actually this past January. Actually, yeah, so I added one bird from the Andes. This is from the Andes, the versicolored barbet. I had to throw it in there because it's just so cool. One of the only tanagers you ever get in the understory is a green and gold white-browed antbird, one of the many. We do get some forest falcons definitely in our nets, usually at the expense of another bird, but can't help that, but it does happen. And obviously we do get a toucan occasionally. That's I'm pretty proud of that toucan. That was the only toucan we've ever caught at that site, so it was really, really cool. And then the best part of, I think, any ringing is the release. And yeah, so we had told you we can get band-tailed manakins often in great numbers. And yeah, this is one net check, 3 adult males. So obviously in this case, it's pretty distinct that we have our nets right near a lek. So the males are just moving around, and yeah, you just keep catching them because it's just like, they're just like breed, 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 and they're all around. So, okay, so that's a bit about the birds there and about kind of a hint of how our aging system works, etc. The final part is just to talk a bit about some of the issues that we have in the Amazon, but I guess specifically in the southeastern part of Peru. So for starters, I mean, when we talk about issues facing the Amazon in general, I think the biggest thing that gets the most attention, understandably, is just deforestation for usually agriculture. Sometimes timber extraction, but this is for agriculture. This is in Brazil, so this is about 250 kilometers east of where we are in southeast Peru, just over the border. And this large-scale deforestation is more common in Brazil than it is actually in Peru. I mean, it's pretty, I mean, would have been nice. I'm trying to find a good spot, but like, okay, there would have been like perfect, harpies, etc. This is just destroyed. I mean, anything here can't live there. It's just no, it's a mess. And it's reality. Now in Peru, this is Peru. This is Puerto Maldonado, and then this is the Tambopata, and this is the Madre de Dios. You do see, obviously, there's some, but the scale of it is not as extreme. There's a few different reasons for that. I mean, I think the biggest reason is that Peru has not been connected to the food industry the same way Brazil has. Brazil does a lot of farming for their own population with cows and cattle, but also obviously, McDonald's and a lot of American, especially in the past, would import a lot of meat from Brazil. So it's much more industrialized, the agriculture in Brazil. Peru has it, it does exist, but most of this is actually not cows. It's not cattle. I mean, up there's some. Most of this is, if it's cattle, it's very small scale. A lot of that is just farms for maize, like corn and other types of crops, papaya, bananas, etc. So it's there, it exists, but it's not, hopefully it won't be in the future, but at the moment it's not as large scale as it is certainly in other areas. What does occur in here a lot though, which is actually really hard to see from a satellite, or a plane even, is sort of managed is actually the wrong word, sort of extraction of timber, okay? So you'll see we actually found this by accident. We were exploring a concession for a lady who owns property, and she had no idea that people had gone into her property illegally and done this, and we found it. And you'll see, pretty big trees that have been, cut down. So this is a good example of what I was sort of alluding to in the previous slides. If you look, I'll just go back up to this one. If you look up here, you'll see there's still quite a bit of forest around it. So from above, the loss of this tree, it's hard to get from a satellite, but this completely changes the structure of the understory. The light is let in, the vegetation, everything just completely changes. And a lot of the ironwood trees, mahoganies, a lot of those biggest, hardest types of wood have been cut down pretty much anywhere where there's roads. I mean, just thousands of these trees. I mean, the ironwood tree is actually like an endangered species because of it. And these trees are hundreds of years old. They actually grow very slow, but that's why they live so long. So the species that are left are these more rapid growing species, but they don't get to the same height. Tree falls continue to occur. It's just a very different type of ecosystem when these large, old, mature trees are taken out. And sometimes you can definitely see complete clear cutting. It does exist. But this here is for agriculture. So it's a different scenario. What we saw here, this is for timber extraction. And that's why you still see forest around it, okay? And it's actually harder, once again, to quantify from satellites. But this is for agriculture. This will be actually for papaya they're going to plant here. And in terms of like fires and that kind of thing, we have them in Peru, but they're not to the level of Brazil, because once again, Brazil is clearing it for cattle. They're doing large scale. Peru doesn't do quite as much large scale. They do a lot of extraction for timber, as I said. And they also do another big problem, which is maybe the biggest problem, one of them at least, is gold mining. So this is a satellite image going west, so Puerto is over here, the other image I showed you. Keep going west, and you see the Andes here. And what you see here, all of this, the widening here, all of that, that's all gold mining, okay? Gold mining is a huge, massive problem. There's another really example. I mean, these tailing ponds are filled with chemicals. I actually got the chance right before Christmas to actually go through, and this was a river. That is not natural. I mean, this has just been devastated, and you turn either way and you see that type of thing. It looks like a bomb went off. The thing about this too is there's two really huge impacts that this type of mining has, okay? I mean, this is just, it's absolutely not natural in any way. So the issues you have with the mining are twofold. Obviously, number one, you've wrecked habitat. That's obvious. I guess it's actually threefold. First one, you've destroyed habitat. Obviously, that's pretty straightforward. But that's confined to here only. Not that that makes it okay, but it's still. But the two things that aren't contained are, number one, the sediment. So when you get heavy rains, and it is a rainforest, it washes the topsoil and the clay into the water, which changes the oxygen content, which has a huge impact on, well, it's cascading impact on invertebrates and fish. And I mean, you guys are smart enough. You can figure out what changing the oxygen content in a river will do. And then probably the biggest thing, definitely, is the mercury. So the way they extract the gold is they pull it out, and then basically they pour mercury over it, and the mercury bonds to the gold. Then they have this big chunk. Then they take the chunk and they heat it, and the mercury melts quickly and melts into the water, and the gold is like, oh, there's my gold nugget, and they throw it in a bucket, okay? That's the old-fashioned way of gold mining. It's the cheapest way, and it's the way almost all of it is still done. And it's a huge problem. I don't have to tell you guys the impacts mercury has on wildlife, human health, and these effects can last years, decades, possibly centuries. So it's a really, really big problem. The government has stepped up efforts to stop it and limit it recently, although with COVID this year, a lot of small-scale operations have started again because many people had switched to ecotourism. They've lost that income this year, and that has had a big impact on pushing people back into the rainforest to try to do legal mining, which is really sad. And then the final thing to talk about on my tour of negativity, I'm sorry, but I'm just trying to give you the idea of what's happening down there, is really, I didn't make this graph. I just needed something to give you a visual representation. So when we talk about climate change, understandably, a lot of the climate change attention is focused on the Arctic because you can see melting ice caps, you can evaluate the temperature. Often the temperature change is really extreme. Understandable. But climate change has already, and I think in the future, can have a massive impact on the rainforest as well. And the reason I like this little graph to show you is that you'll see that often the temperature is the high. So for where we are, to give you an idea, rainy season, rainy season, rainy season, transition, dry, transition, rainy season, okay? So basically what you're seeing is the temperature is highest at the end of the dry season. But keep in mind, this is summertime, okay? This is the middle of their summer down there. The only reason that the temperature is lower here is because of the rain, because of the cloud cover. You take away the cloud cover, you take away the rain, and this goes way up high. I've experienced in January 5 days in a row without a single cloud in the sky, and the temperatures are 36 to 39 degrees or higher. And the problem with that too is it's exacerbated. It's like a cyclical effect because there's so much vegetation at that time of the year growing and sucking in the water that when it doesn't come, it gets really thirsty. So things dry out really rapidly. So even when it rains for one day, it's just gone. 1 day of rain here actually lasts longer, even though it hasn't rained for weeks, than in the rainy season because all the vegetation's sucking it in. So when you lose the cloud cover and you lose the rain, the temperatures go up, everything gets drier, it gets worse and worse and worse, and it doesn't feed itself to rain more. That cycle, that system gets completely thrown out of whack. And not to be too negative, but I just think it's important to highlight that when we talk about the Arctic and all the issues facing it, these things occur across the entire world. That's why climate change is not limited to one area. So I have only been down in that region for 3 years, but talking to locals and reading research programs and papers in the past, generally in January, it's extremely rare to go more than 1.5 days without rain. And I have experienced many weeks with almost no rain already. Yeah, things are not normal down there in terms of climate. So yeah, I don't know how long it took, but hopefully not too long. That gives you a bit of an idea of sort of what we're doing with birds and what we're facing down there. If you have any questions, feel free to fire away. Aging is really important because we do get a lot of recaptures. So the way we do, I didn't specify how we as an organization do our ringing and our banding, but we move around to all those different sites throughout the year, but we will come back to them. And we obviously, I mean, same as would be here, our net locations are the same year after year. So we may come back to a net location 6 years later, and you will get recaptures. Like the oldest recapture I've got was a little golden crown spadebill, which is just a little bit bigger than a gold crest here. Tiny little bird, and it was 9 years old, and it was ringed like I was still like different life for me in Canada somewhere when it was ringed, and I come down there and I catch, and I'm just like, I remember catching it and pulling it out of the bag and like, what the heck, because we just got to this site, we haven't been here for years, and it's got a ring on it, and yeah, we went back and checked it, 9 years old. So they can live quite a while. So, you know, aging them is so important because then you actually can say this bird is 9 as opposed to like, we don't know how old it is because it wasn't aged. So yeah, aging is something we want to, I mean, it's the same here. We want to try to attach an age if we can. So yeah, it is important for us to try to get that for sure. But yeah, so. Yeah, it's very similar. I mean, the coding is different, and obviously the thing that is different down there is that you can't look at the calendar and say this bird should be either this way or that way because of the calendar. You have to, like the way I would imagine it is take a bird here, spin the calendar, and then don't tell the person what day it is, and then give them the bird. And then you can't use the date, you can't use the weather or anything like that as a guide. You have to just look at the bird independently and age it from there. Other than that, I mean, molting's molting. It doesn't change that much, right? But you can't use the season at all to help you. You have to go purely on what you see in the bird, and that's it. Because there is peaks in breeding, but it's not reliable at all. You can't go by that whatsoever. I wish you could. Every adult bird in that what we call basic molt, so that would be, okay, so I'll use the term properly this time, a post-breeding molt. Everyone does a complete, absolutely, no matter what. And then the big question isn't whether they do a complete molt, because that's definite. It's whether the first year, the juveniles, do a complete or not. That's where you have to figure that out. And that's where for the species that do a complete, because they do a complete and so do the adults, you're stuck. So you have to then go to the skull. So when we get one that has a 6th skull fully ossified and it's not molting, and you look at it, you have to go FAJ. That's the code we use to say we just don't know. If they're molting, even if it's like like if there's one retained, you know, what we would call P10, which is, I guess for some of you, P1, like the outer primary, and then like if it's retained, then right away you can do a comparison. You can see the age. You're like, this is a terrible feather juvenile, easy first year. Or if it's retained and it's really nice quality, yeah, obviously it's an older bird. But when you get one that's not molting, you can, you know, this is where for me, I like to be really certain. So I would make a note saying probably juvenile with a 6th skull or probably adult, but we like to be pretty definite. So we would often just leave it unknown, which is the same theory that we'd use here. I think most of the time, most people do that. But so aging is, again, with experience is not that hard, but there are those frustrating birds where you're just FAJ, that's it, move on. There's nothing you can do. The theory that I think a lot of people would subscribe to is the fact that the wear on the feathers is so high for Furnariidae. They generally have a more physical lifestyle. Like the wood creepers are rubbing against trees a lot. A lot of the foliage gleaners and the leaf tossers are in amongst vegetation more, so possibly wearing feathers down more. So it might justify replacing all the juvenile feathers so that you're still able to live your life properly, so you don't have these destroyed tail feathers and destroyed outer primaries. But it is an interesting question, because theoretically, why couldn't they survive with a partial preformative or, you know, post-juvenile molt? That's a question for evolution, which I don't have a specific answer for, but it is an interesting thing. And though that group of birds, Furnariidae, you just learn to accept failure with aging sometimes. What I mean is sometimes you just can't age them. But we do our best through the sculling and other aspects, but it can be confusing. Obviously, the thing is too, if you get one with a brood patch, you can't age it necessarily as over a year, because they can breed at 10 months. So you can't say, oh, it's brood patch, it must be, you know, over a year of age. Not necessarily. So you can't even rely on that. You need to look at some kind of plumage characteristic or the skull. If you don't have that, you can make a note. You can say, I think it's this, but to put it, you know, we use that, just like here, we use that aging column, and that's what is the definite age of the bird. And I'm not going to put a definite in there till I'm actually definite. That's what the FAJ code is for, which is, some of you might have heard me talk about getting a tattoo, FAJ for life. That's why, because those little wood creepers, those wedge-billed wood creepers, you pull them out and there's nothing and you're like, ah, FHA for life. Yeah, so they're annoying, but it is what it is. It's fine. So there's a few things to mention. First of all, can it be done? Yes. Are there some sites and organizations that have done it? Yes. But there's a lot of limiting factors for it and issues. I guess most of it comes down to money and also behavior of the bird. So when it comes to money, you've basically got to have a platform built in the trees at 35 meters to another platform, and a net you can pull in and out. It's quite complicated. If you're doing one site for continuously, 20 years, you never move, that's your site, you might be able to justify the funding or get grants to build that. For our organization, you could argue a weakness, but I would choose to say a strength of our organization is that we move all around the region. We're the only organization that is mobile and moving and assessing all over instead of just one little spot. So we just don't have the funding to justify investment in one site we'll be at for 3 months. You could build, you could do triple or quadruple highs, but they're still only going to get up to 15 meters. So we get some of those mid-story species, subcanopy, but we never get the true canopy ones. The other thing about canopy banding, ringing, whatever, I have not done it yet. I actually really want to do it, and if I go back early this year, I may. But I've talked to people who do it, and they say the actual catch rate is quite low. And I think one of the reasons is, once again, we all know if nets work better when they're hidden. And if you hide them, you're not in the canopy. If you put them up in the canopy, they're not hidden. And the tanager's like, oh, hi, I see that. So it's difficult. It can be done, but the reward for it, from what I have read and heard and talked to people, is often, unless you have a site you're at for years, it's simply not really worth it. The way we survey canopy species is mostly through point counts. Point counts or transects or plots, depending on your strategy, but that's the normal survey method. However, the tanagers, the really pretty nuggets of gold I showed you, they're a nightmare, because when you're doing a walking or I guess a terrestrial point count from below, as I said, you just can't ID most of them. You just do Throppidae sp, which is the family, because you just can't reliably do it. And if I met someone who said, I can tell the difference between blue-gray tanager and palm tanager every time, I'd be like, you're lying. You can't. You really can't. They're just chitter chatter. That's all it is. Think of the weakest, most nondescript contact call between any little finch here. I don't mean song. I don't mean an actual repeat. I mean a little tiny chitter that's super variable. That's all they ever do, and they're almost complete overlap. Even on sonograms, it's not reliable. So for some species we can, but for many of them we have to just put them as kind of an SP. But we can easily survey, actually it's the same for the parrots and the macaws as well. Often we have to just group it as it's a macaw, it's a parrot, that's all we can do reliably. But for toucans and arcaries and a lot of the birds up there, we can very reliably identify them through point counts. So it's kind of a mixed bag, but yeah. I'm trying to think of, I don't have a specific species number off the top of my head, but in terms of groups, all the mannequins, basically, I'm trying to think of, there's a couple that don't, but almost all the Pipridae, which is the family there, and almost all mannequins. The screaming pia do it. Yeah, those are the big ones that do it. There's a couple other individual species that use lekking. Most of them, but those are the big groups that do it, which account for not necessarily a huge number of species, like literally species, but in terms of the biomass, it's a decent amount. It's probably 10% of them. 10% of the biomass is actually lekking, and so that's maybe 7, 8%, 10% is fine. So a decent amount. Then there are species that are like a lot of tinamous and stuff. They don't really lek; they just kind of display and call, and the females, if they're around, it happens. If not, then so be it. But it's not specific formulated lekking. Males often have an area where is their territory. Females are around. It happens, and then the females move off again. And then many species have very strict territories year-round. And actually, one cool thing, which I didn't mention, is that for most species in our area, not all, but many of them, so the Thamnophilidae and the Furnariidae, both sexes sing, which is very interesting. And they sing year-round. So the idea here, you hear singing, you're only hearing the male. That does not apply down there. Both sexes sing, and they sing mostly year-round because they're defending that territory year-round. There isn't that migration. There isn't that mixture in the winter versus the summer. We do have mixed species flocks down there, but they're different than here. Mixed species flocks here occur at this time of the year because they're not breeding, and then breeding season, most of the time they spread out and then they mix again Down there, it's a pretty much continuous year-round mixed species flock, which has a really specific leader species, follower species, and then opportunistic follower species. And the core of that flock is basically connected most of the year. It may change a bit when they're breeding because one member of it might be tending to the young, but often the male or female is still in it. So the mixed species flock system, which occurs, actually you can get it even in the mid-story, but it's very common in the understory and the canopy, is very interesting down there, and it's actually been studied decent amount, although there's certainly more room to do more study. But it occurs in Africa and Asia as well. That's a year-round type of mixed species flock cohesiveness. It's a really cool byproduct of the tropical zones because of the stability of the season. So it's very distinct. When you're walking through the forest, once you know the call, you're like, oh, that's a dusky-throated inch, right? There's a mixed species flock here, guaranteed. It has to be. So, yeah. Alrighty. Well, that was great. I enjoyed that. Hopefully you guys did. Thank you.